Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to F1 in Review. This is episode 3, and today I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher, and today we'll be carrying on with our progression of last season, talking about Austria, the British Grand Prix, Germany and Hungary. So starting off with the Austrian Grand Prix, qualifying. It started with Bottas, Hamilton and Kimi Raikkonen. Results, however, changed it, with Verstappen finishing first, Kimi Raikkonen second and Sebastian Vettel in third. So a small recap of this race. Bottas started from pole, but Ferrari's Kimi Raikkonen muscled between the fin and Hamilton off the line and took second place. With Hamilton in the lead and Bottas briefly falling behind, Max Verstappen into fourth after the first corner. Bottas reclaimed second place after a brave move around the outside of Verstappen and Kimi Raikkonen into turn 4, and Mercedes looked to be in control. However, Bottas retired in lap 14 of 71 with a loss of hydraulic pressure, and Mercedes strategist failed to react to the imposition of the virtual safety car, which remotely forced all cars to reduce speed as his car was recovered. Stopping under the virtual safety car cost less time than during the active races, for those who are unaware, and the leading teams apart from Mercedes took advantage. The world champions soon realised they'd made a very grave error. So everyone, the first question of this episode is, with Bottas having such a rough season, and this being highlighted by this race, do you think Mercedes should compensate next season in order to keep Valtteri Bottas sweet? Of course, you know, he is the future of Mercedes, and he's had a really bad time. What do you think?
Gonna disagree with you straight away. I don't think he is the future of Mercedes.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously he's a very decent driver with a very decent pedigree. His years at Williams proved that, getting onto the podium in a team which hadn't been on the podium or been around that sort of area for many, many years. So the temperament to be able to do that, I think, is admirable. And then, to be honest, he was only brought in because when Nico Rosberg won the 2016 World Championship, he announced a shock retirement, and Mercedes needed a quick replacement, and Bottas was the cheapest option available. Very good driver, admittedly, who I said had proven his ability at Williams, but he was sort of, I feel like he was always going to be a stopgap. Mercedes have this youth academy of drivers, not as renowned as, say, Red Bull's academy, which has brought through Vettel and Verstappen and all those great talents, but Mercedes, the main ones they had Pascal Wehrlein, who for a while was seen as the next big thing, but unfortunately has fallen off the map. But now you've got Esteban Ocon, who, due to circumstances outside of his control, frankly, has had to take a year out Formula One, and he's now Mercedes test driver for a year. So I think there's definitely an angle there towards the future with him being only 21 years old. And you've also got George Russell, the young British driver who is making his debut this year with Williams, only 21 years old again, won the lower category Formula 2 championship last year. And again, one for the future. That's two drivers who have very great potential in Formula 1, both very young ages. Bottas himself, almost coming up to the wrong side of 30. And in terms of his, I'd say also, I don't think he's the future because in terms of his performances, last season, yes, he did have a lot of bad luck, with Austria being one prime example. He qualified on pole, had not the best start, but was running around in second, definitely a chance for the win before his gearbox failed. But there was still a lot of times, there's been a trend in his 2 seasons at Mercedes. He'll stay with Hamilton in terms of pace the first half of the season. Second half of the season, there tends to be a big drop off, and whilst it works for them to have a number one and number two driver, with the other driver in the other car being one of the best drivers of all time, still they don't want someone who's half a second or more off the pace in qualifying or runs around during the races, instead of coming second or third, comes like fifth or sixth. So I don't think it's the future of Mercedes. I don't see a need to keep him sweet. I definitely think even if he left Mercedes, he'd still find his feet at another team, because I think he's a quality driver, and a top midfield team would do no worse than snapping him up. But I think Mercedes' focus should be on making sure the talents such as Ocon and Russell are nurtured, rather than keeping Bottas sweet, to be honest.
So can you see ultimately then Bottas one day being ultimately deposed by Mercedes once he's served his purpose as a stopgap?
Yeah, for sure. You also bear in mind that, he will. I think he'll be deposed, but also Mercedes. It's good that they have 2 young drivers coming through, because Hamilton, as much as he's on top of his game right now, he turned 34 the other week. We do see some drivers getting to that age and beyond and being at the top of their game, but there's no guarantees, and Hamilton may just suddenly decide to call it a day, because his achievements in the sport are unparalleled by many, and he may see that as like the ultimate limit he could reach. So that may lead to them promoting both Ocon and Russell. So I think even if Hamilton was to say retire at the end of this year and they needed to promote one of the drivers, they might keep Bottas in for another year. But I think again only as a stopgap before they've promoted, let's say they promoted Ocon in Hamilton's place at the end of this year. There'd probably be only another year before they thought Russell was ready to depose Bottas as well.
Well, Bottas, right? Bottas for me is the definition of a beige trouser driver. He's incredibly inoffensive in the way that he acts and he drives. You know, there is a very good reason why Kimi Räikkönen is known as the Flying Finn, and Bottas is known as Bottas, the one that came from Williams. And he's a great driver. There's no doubt about that. Mercedes would have picked him if he's not dependable. He's not useful, and but at the moment I feel like he's being a bit of a tool for Toto Wolff and the strategists over in the Silver Arrows. They use him to, but look, he's at the front, brilliant. All right, we want you to stay at the front, obviously win the race, but he never really puts himself out there. I mean, there's examples throughout the season when he's been told, by the way, we don't want you to fight, we just want you to drive, and then basically at that point he's becoming a taxi driver for 3 points. He's been put into a car which is faster than most of the others. Most circuits, the Mercedes will essentially drive itself into second or first position as long as it's got a competent driver behind. And in that sense, you could basically put anyone behind there. There is obviously talent there when he's fighting with other drivers. But Bottas, he loses ambition so quickly. There's cases when he's fighting with Raikkonen, and he holds Raikkonen off for a few laps and then just sort of lets him pass. Whereas if you look at people like Verstappen, they will do everything in their power to not let the car behind through, even if they're in a sort of a speed deficit. That's the problem I think you have with Bottas. Is he's not going to excel anywhere. Because they won't give him a car that he can excel in, because most of the research and development goes over to Hamilton, because as you say, he's at his prime. I reckon Hamilton's got a good another 4 or 5 years before he significantly drops off. I mean, there's only so much your body can take at that point. I mean, he's already suffering from things like neck problems, and he's getting back problems as well with the amount of G-force you're going through continuously. And I think if Bottas was going to become a number one driver, he would have made his move now. And if I was him, I would have said to Mercedes, right, where can we go from this, or start talking to other teams as well. I mean, it was pretty brave. It's pretty brave what people like Ricciardo have done when they said, actually, I'm not renewing my contract. I want to see what other teams will offer me. And that's what I mean. There's no fighting spirit from Bottas. Even with the Mercedes, I bet he's never gone, do you know what? I think I can do better than this. Help me get better. I think Bottas will stay as a number 2 driver, and I don't think he's the future of Mercedes, because he's just a bit beige. He's just a bit boring. No one ever goes, do you know what a great driver he is? He's dependable. He's easy. He's I don't know. He's just a driver at this point. He's got no real pizzazz around him. I think that's because of the. I think he's been a bit deflated by Mercedes. He was definitely excited to go there from Williams, especially after Williams didn't do particularly well when he was with them. But as Mercedes, as I say, he's just a taxi driver for points at this point.
Surely, though, that's a good quality, perhaps, for a Formula 1 driver, in the fact that when we're looking at teams, there's always the aggressive driver, the number 1 driver, and then there's the number 2 driver to sort of make it a balanced ticket. I mean, looking historically, we've seen at somewhere like McLaren, where we had Alonso and Hamilton, constantly fighting one another. Sometimes it would work, but other times it would be to the detriment of the team. Looking more recently at somewhere like Mercedes, you'd have Rosberg and Hamilton, and they'd often clash, and it would be, once again, to the detriment of the team. So ultimately, don't you think it's good almost for Mercedes to have a beige trouser driver, as you called him?
Well, this is the perplexing problem of Formula 1. They say there are 2 races. There are the races between all drivers, and then there are the inter-races between drivers on the team. And yeah, fine. What you're pointing at there is when things go terribly wrong. We know that Force India had the same problems. You have 2 very, very competitive drivers. However, you take them out of that situation, right? You talk to the drivers and you discuss with them. Look, you can't beat each other up. You can't take out the cars, right? That's perfectly normal. You should be doing that, with any other car, right? It doesn't matter if you're a team or not. You shouldn't be taking any other car out. So that's just normal racing. And actually, drivers that take out other cars, it shows they're actually not particularly good at driving, and Bottas is. I don't think you'd have that risk with Bottas. I think they're certainly making Bottas a secondary driver, and in reality, it makes it pretty boring. And also, if you don't give them the fighting spirit, there's nothing, motivating them to defend their position. And that's what's so important. Is it's Hamilton might go off and be 2-3 seconds a lap faster with open air, and as a result, Bottas might be back in second, defending second place. But giving him that real fighting spirit means that he's fighting with other drivers. He's pushing through the pack. He relies on the fact that Mercedes is a faster car than any other car, often in races, to get back into the position. And whereas if you look at Lewis Hamilton, you look at the passes he does, you look at the way he defends, you look at the grit and determination of people like Max Verstappen. Are you telling me that you see that sort of motivation in Bottas? Because I don't. I don't see that raw fighting. I'm gonna definitely hold on to second no matter what. I mean, if you swap Ricciardo, for example, with Bottas in Monaco, right? I don't think Bottas would have held on to the first position with a broken car, with such a power deficit. I think it was Ricciardo's grit and determination that allowed him to do that. Because yes, fine, Monaco's hard to pass, but it's not impossible. And he held off. And I don't think Bottas has that same sort of, essence of racing. And I think actually Mercedes is the one that did that to him, because I think he really pushed hard in Williams, but as soon as he got to to Mercedes, they sort of just culled him a little bit and were like, right, now you're going to be number 2 to Hamilton. Don't mess it up. Make sure that Hamilton can stay in first place. Hold off second and third and fourth as long as you can, because they probably will catch Hamilton, and that's it. So yeah, fine, it's very dependable, but I think they purposely limited him, and now he's a bit. Well, I think it's probably a bit depressing for him, and that's why the rumours have come out that he's looking for another drive.
Interesting. Just before we move on then to the British Grand Prix, let's say hypothetically Esteban Ocon and George Russell are at Mercedes. Do you think they could work successfully together, or are they too similar? Are they too aggressive drivers? And do they need a balance there?
To be honest, it's difficult to say because Russell hasn't even started a Formula 1 race yet. So, I mean, his potential in Formula 1 is yet to be uncovered. I'd say Ocon is definitely a feisty driver. That is one of the things that Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, has constantly referenced about how the Hamilton and Rosberg years, whilst it brought them a lot of success, at the time the car they had was far ahead of the pack. So the conflict that they had between Hamilton and Rosberg, the animosity, sort of didn't really matter in the end because they were so far ahead that they could crash into each other a couple of races a year and they'd still win the rest of the races. But now with Ferrari much closer, and mostly last year, arguably on another level, like slightly higher level, and also with Red Bull catching up and at certain races being superior to Mercedes, having a number one driver and a driver who was basically having two drivers who could get on well definitely worked. And we've already seen with Ocon at Force India, him and Perez coming into conflict a few times, not necessarily getting on well. After one race in 2017 in Belgium, they crashed in the race, and Ocon afterwards accused Perez of trying to kill him. So arguably Ocon is kind of one of those confrontational personalities. But we're going back to keeping Bottas sweet. I honestly think Mercedes may have to sacrifice the sort of the calm relations between their two drivers, because we got Ferrari again, who we presume will be on the same level as Mercedes again this year, or possibly may again have a faster car, and they've replaced who I think was a similar driver in a similar situation. Kimi Räikkönen was sort of not the incredible sort of race winning as fast driver as he was in his early years. He sort of fulfilled the Bottas role at Ferrari. And now you got Charles Leclerc, a young driver who I believe will hit the ground running straight away. Lots of potential. So you could get two Ferrari drivers getting lots and lots of points. Maybe enough points to surpass Mercedes in the Constructors' Championship. So if Mercedes feel that bringing in a new young driver, such as Ocon or Russell, if they feel it would get them more points in the Constructors' Championship, they may have to weigh that up and sacrifice a bit of team harmony. So I think I'd say maybe having Ocon and Russell in the same team is a bit of an early risk, but gradually sort of phasing them into the team, I think it could be essential if they want to keep hold of that Constructors' Championship.
Well, Russell and Ocon, what a combination. As you say, we haven't actually seen them together, and Ocon in Force India was something to be. Was something to behold, really. They were they're incredibly aggressive. But what you got to remember is Mercedes. You do have a big Austrian bloke watching over, and no one wants to get on the wrong side of Toto Wolff. There is a fantastic image of Toto when Mercedes crash each other out, and it just looked like pure anger emanating from Toto. So he will keep them in control, and this is the thing. As soon as you get two new drivers, they're going to fight it out for first and second. If you're going to have a primary and a secondary driver, then you've got to let them work out which one it is. You have real problems if you don't. I mean, iconically, go back to racing in the 1980s. People like Senna versus Prost, right? Which one was the number one, number two driver? And in the end, they were both fighting to be number one and number two, taking each other out, and that sort of stuff. So if you have a 1 and 2, you've got to have a 1 and 2, and allow them to find out which one's which. Or, and I think this is the better option, you do what people like Red Bull do. Who's number 1 and number 2 out of Ricciardo and Verstappen? Like they were on pretty equal. They were on equal cars and given equal measures. So, in reality, Ocon, and Russell will have to sort of settle down a bit. And I don't think it's bad having two drivers that are on the same level and both number 1 drivers. And if the car is good, then they should be first and second. They'll flip round as many times as the tracks play to their skills. But that's the point, really, isn't it? If you have equal cars, then one of them will be better on a track, and other people have other good and bad days, and that will settle the championship. It's when you have two drivers that are on equal talent, on equal cars, and are first and second every single time that you start getting problems. But I can't see that happening just because the rest of the pack is catching up. I don't think that you'll have a runaway victory from Mercedes. I think Mercedes could possibly win the 2019 championship, but I would also say that Ferrari could win, especially with Leclerc coming through and Vettel being as strong as he was this time. So I think it's certainly the fact that the pack is closer this season, or should be closer this season, mitigates the dangers of having two front runners that are so far away from the rest of the pack, because the chances are, as much as Russell and Ocon are fighting with each other, they'll also be fighting the rest of the pack as well. They'll be defending, they'll be fighting to get through, and everyone will have good and bad days. So I think it's certainly less of a threat than when we looked at the Rosberg versus Hamilton days.
For sure. So moving on to the British Grand Prix, qualifying finished with Lewis Hamilton in first, Sebastian Vettel in second, and Kimi Räikkönen in third. This all switched around though, and it ended with Sebastian Vettel winning the race, Hamilton in second and Kimi Räikkönen in third. So a quick recap of that race. Hamilton spun on the first lap, resulting in having to fight through the pack and to claim second place. But when asked afterwards for his thoughts on the race, while on the podium with Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen, Hamilton appeared to look towards the Ferrari drivers and said, and I quote, "Interesting tactics, I would say, from this side, but we'll do what we can to fight them and improve in next races." So the first question, and only question for the British Grand Prix, was, do you think this sort of attitude from Lewis Hamilton on the podium after the race was evidence that ultimately the guy's a bad loser and that ultimately he's taking it all too far?
On that occasion, it may be a bit of a bad lose. I think you have to bear in mind the circumstances. It was his home race. He qualified on pole for, I think, the 6th time, which is a record. He was aiming to win it for the 5th year in a row, which I think again would be a record. And the fact that got taken away from him by just basically lazy driving from Raikkonen, to be honest, just take him out on the first lap, just giving him a tap from behind. I can understand why the emotions came through. And the fact that it's only sort of the only outbursts we've seen from Hamilton this year, I'd say it wasn't him being a bad loser on that occasion for sure. But I don't think it's a trait that he has for the rest of the season. Like, also you got to bear in mind the other circumstances at the time. It was a very tight championship battle. That was a time when Ferrari was starting to gain a bit of superiority with the car performance as well. So, and this, if you think about also this race coming into it, Hamilton was only 1 point off Vettel, and let's say he'd won that race easily, Vettel had come in second or even third if Bottas had overtaken him. Hamilton could definitely have opened up a championship lead. But as it was, Hamilton had to fight back, to be honest, quite brilliantly from last to come through and finish second. But he still left the race with an 8-point deficit in the championship, which, if you bear in mind what happened on the first lap, could definitely have been a lot better than that for him in that scenario.
Being a bad loser in Formula One isn't the same as being a bad loser when you're playing something like Monopoly with your family. Right? You have to be a bad loser. You have to get, this is really bad, but you have to be a bad loser because you've got to use that passion to get yourself fighting fit, ready for 2 weeks or sometimes a week later. If you come out and go, you know what, I lost, that's disappointing. What you're going to do is you're going to go back and you won't reflect properly, and it's a double-edged sword because you get outbursts like that, but you've got to be driven. It's like the arrogance, right? When you look at Formula One drivers, they're very arrogant. They're like, oh, I'm the best. It was their fault. I never did anything wrong. And that's because they've got to be like that. You've got to psych yourself up. You've got to believe that you are better than the people you're racing against. Because if you don't, then you start being opened up to the problems that you won't face them properly. You won't battle them properly. You won't go in, brake later. You won't believe that your brakes are cooler and therefore, you can brake later than your rivals, whatever. And so Hamilton has always been a bad loser. No Formula One driver is a good loser. I mean, look at when they crash out, they start throwing their very expensive steering wheels to the floor and stuff like that. And that's just racing. I don't think Raikkonen actually meant to take out Hamilton. It was unfortunate for Hamilton that he did, but we've seen that throughout the season. You had was Verstappen who got spun at one point, or
Yep.
he spun Vettel or something like that. They spin all the time, and these things happen. And actually, the fact that Hamilton managed to get back into second from that definitely shows you that he's a talented driver. And also, if Raikkonen was going to take out Hamilton, surely he would have done it when he came past again to get back into second place. There's a lack of continuity. Race incidents happen all the time. That's the thing about the first lap. You've got as many cars trying to get into one place, and as a result, you're going to have late braking, you have early braking, you have people going wide and cutting corners and stuff like that. And as a result, the outcome for that one was Hamilton spinning around in a circle, and it didn't. It's 7 points lost on halfway through, and I don't think anyone thought that Hamilton would really be hit badly by it. And anyway, in Formula One, you tend to get problem in one place, but actually you get an advantage in somewhere else. I mean, to counter this, you had what happened in Germany that we'll come on to. So. The realities is Hamilton is a bad loser. He has to be a bad loser. They're all bad losers. They're all arrogant. They all believe they're better than anyone else and how they should win. And I don't think it's fair to call them cheaters because Hamilton is no angel himself. He's definitely committed. He's committed fouls in foul play in the past. So that's it.
Do you think then that ultimately Sebastian Vettel should get angrier when he's losing because he hasn't won a podium has won a championship, I'd say, in many, many years, and ultimately when he comes on the podium, he always says, it wasn't a bad race, we were behind the Mercedes, we'll go again next race. But you never see him, unlike the German one we'll talk about in a moment, he's actually loses it. Do you think ultimately that's a negative quality for him in a racer?
Oh no, he definitely loses. It's just camera show, isn't it? If you got onto camera and pulled an Alonso and went, this team is rubbish and look at the car, it's not performing, and I've never had so little power. Ferrari would drop him in an instant. I mean, Ferrari have a history of doing that. They dropped Prost back in the day because he criticised the car. No driver is going to stand up there in public on the camera and officially be like, this is appalling. I'm great, the car is rubbish, because that's just not really true. Vettel does get angry. The fact that he broke the weighing scales, for example, shows that he's impatient. He doesn't like losing, and he wants to get on with the race as quickly as possible. I think he does get pretty angry about this stuff, but he certainly, he does a lot of swearing, but he won't go on camera. Then none of them will really go on camera, because it's career suicide, and especially as if Vettel gets dropped now, he has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
No one is going to pick him back up. There are new drivers coming through the ranks. Mercedes certainly aren't going to pick him up, and so if he's in a very, very, he's backed into a corner a little bit. He's got a good car, and so he's got to be like, oh, it's a little bit of my fault. It's a little bit of the car's fault. We'll try again later. Because that's what Ferrari have to hear. That's what the public have to hear. Because if he starts going up there and being like, oh no, this car is appalling, he will be dropped, he will be replaced, probably at the end of the season, and that's it for him. His career's over.
Sure, now talking about worse things, or, some of the worst things that happened to Sebastian Vettel, we're moving on to, of course, the German Grand Prix. Qualifying, Sebastian Vettel was in first, Bottas was second, and Kimi Raikkonen was in third. However, it ended differently with Hamilton in first, Bottas second, and Raikkonen in third. So Vettel, lest we forget, was cruising with 25 laps to go, with the race looking as good as done. Vettel, in the wet conditions, proceeded to lose the car and gift wrap a pole position to Lewis Hamilton. So what do you make of this mistake from Vettel? Just an unlucky mistake, or evidence that he has a tendency to ultimately crumble under pressure in the big moments?
I wouldn't say it's a tendency to crumble under pressure. I think it was an isolated incident at the time, because he's shown under pressure moments in the past that he can certainly deliver. You think back to Brazil 2012 when he had to, I think it was finish in fourth place, or at least hope that Alonso didn't finish on the podium to win the World Championship, and then at the end of lap one they started 6th and 7th, and Vettel was last and having been punted off, and Alonso was in third, but he managed to fight his way back through the pack up to about 10th in about 15 laps, and from there went on to win the championship. So I think he can certainly deliver in pressure moments, but I think this one, again, the circumstances around it, he never won his home Grand Prix at this. He'd won his home Grand Prix at the other German circuit, the Nürburgring, but he'd never won it at Hockenheim. And also the fact there was an 8-point gap in the championship, high stakes, etc. And that definitely contributes towards it. And also the fact it just started raining in the accident, the raining in the race, and that's definitely led to him sort of sliding off the track. I think what we have to commend more in this race, I'd say, is Hamilton's ability to get the job done. His car, I think it was his gearbox, failed in qualifying. He would have been a favourite for pole position. But this meant that this was in the first part of qualifying, so he couldn't run in the rest of qualifying, ended up 14th on the grid, managed to fight his way through, and then he was in prime position to take advantage when Vettel crashed, and he went on to win the race from there. So, to be honest, I think more credit has to be given to Hamilton's drive. For me personally, one of his best ever drives. I mean, we're so used to drivers winning from inside the top few places in Formula One. I mean, winning from 14th on the grid, I think has only been done from that far back about 8 times in history, and you bear in mind it's been close to 1,000 races. So I think that's another thing. You could possibly have had Vettel with a thought in the back of his mind of his championship rival, whilst not being his biggest threat, because he had Bottas and Raikkonen closer behind him, he still might have had the lurking thought of Hamilton being sort of in fourth, as he was, and let's say there was a safety car, with the changeable conditions there was, you never know what could have happened from that point. So that might again have played into Vettel's mind. To be honest, watching back the replay, it was quite a simple mistake. It was one of the slowest corners on the track, just braking too late and sliding off at like excruciatingly slow speed. So you have to sort of feel a bit sorry for Vettel in that point, but I think he did crumble under pressure a little bit in that moment. And whilst it's not something he does a lot, he did it a couple of times later on in the season, with like spinning out in some races. But you have to say some of those were 50-50 racing incidents. This one was all Vettel's doing, but I still think it was an isolated instance if you look back at his ability to deliver under pressure, especially in the past in big championship deciders, for example.
So I was at Germany 2 years before that, and my God, I wish we had a race like that when I was there, because when I was there it was deadly boring. You had Hamilton who ran off, and then no one ever caught up ever since, and every a minute or so he'd come flying past. Oh, there he is, and then about 5 or 6 seconds later, everyone else would come past as well. So Germany's a fantastic, and it's actually, I was on that corner when I was there, so it is a very slow corner. It's fantastic if you want to watch the cars go past. And this is the problem with rain. This is why rain is such a problem, because when you're driving, you learn a track, you learn where the brake points are, you learn when to turn in, you learn the optimum arc, basically, to optimize how many straight lines you've got. That's so you can put down the power, especially as you don't have anti-lock brakes and you don't have traction control either. And yeah, you're perfectly right. This is one of those moments of Vettel's got the track. He knows where the track is. He knows brake plate, point X. He knows turn in at point Y. He knows put down the power at point Z, and that's it. And when you add rain on slicks, what you do is you basically add a little layer of oil onto it. It becomes very, very greasy, especially as you also have bits of rubber around there as well, because it's a very slow corner. Even though it's a slow corner, it's very tight corners, and you'll get marbling. So it's a combination of factors, I think, there. And when you go slow in a Formula 1 car, you lose heat, you lose downforce, and you can turn much sharper. So what you end up getting is a horrible combination where you've got no downforce to keep yourself on the track, you've got slippery conditions because you're on slick tyres with no grip, and you've got a very, very tight radius around the corner. And so what you get is your back coming out, and you just slide off, and that's it. And I reckon if Vettel hadn't have done that, another driver certainly would have, because everyone else went, oh my God, he's gone off, I better play this differently. And when you learn a track, as you do, if you're if you're at the front, you just know where to brake. It was an autopilot. There was no real, oh dear, it's raining, I've probably got way less heat in my tyres now than I thought I did. I also have any downforce, and I don't have much grip. So there was no transition for me, and that's the problem. Everyone spins off. So it was an isolated incident. Everyone does it, and it's a horrible combination of factors. And it's that awful point where you haven't got intermediates on because they'll overheat, and you can't, and you still get slicks on, but obviously that's got no real grip, and a really, really slow, cold corner. So and someone was going to come off, and it just happened to be Sebastian Vettel, and he got very, very angry for it.
He did indeed.
He did,
yes,
however,
yes.
give the spectators around there a fantastic view of the car, because obviously he's been slamming into the barrier. Yeah.
So before we move on to Hungary, do you think this crash was the beginning of the end for Sebastian Vettel and his championship hopes, or is it too early to say that?
Well, as you said, right, in your summing up, he gift wrapped Lewis Hamilton 25 free points.
Yes.
And even if Hamilton came first and Vettel came second, you've still got a deficit of 6 points. It was the beginning of the end, really. I think at that point everyone went, he's probably not going to win the championship. And then you had the other incidents for when Vettel spun later on, as you said, and that was the beginning of little things that gave you an inkling of he's not really there. They made a big thing of the 1 point difference between Hamilton and Vettel, and it really, at that stage, if there's only 1 point, it's either going to be really close to the end, or something's going to happen and it's going to deflate you. And I think Vettel was deflated after that. I think the later tracks don't really play to the strengths of Ferrari. You need a lot. The place like Monza really is great for Ferrari. And as a result, it was just the end. It was the beginning of the end. I don't think anyone came out of that and thought Vettel's going to get it back.
I'm of a slightly different opinion. I wouldn't say it was the beginning of the end, because there was still this was only race 11 of 21, halfway through the season, long way to go. And at this point, and as was proven in the races to follow, especially in the dry, the Ferrari was still the fastest car. When it came to the wets, yes, you had the car deficit was evened out, and Hamilton would often prevail. as he did in this race, as proven by the fact that he didn't crash and Vettel did.
It's a pretty big factor, that one.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't say, because it was so long to go in the season. Even so, Hamilton won this race and took a 17-point lead after this one. But with 10 races left, that's still 250 points left on the table. That's a lot of points at that stage in the season. It's so many points that mathematically still all of the drivers, even those in the worst cars, could still win the championship, as unlikely as that may seem. So I think whilst it was almost a case of, I think at that stage it showed a bit of a difference, because Hamilton had a supposedly bad race by getting punted out at the start of the British Grand Prix, but he'd come back to finish second, whilst Vettel's bad race had resulted in him not scoring any points. But still, at that stage, way too early to tell. I think you might get these little signs. Some people would say like, oh, it's a sign that Vettel's cracking under pressure. In that occasion, he certainly did, but I think at that stage it was too early to call, because there was still plenty of time to resurrect his season.
I suppose it is very easy in hindsight to go and say, was this the beginning of the end, when Vettel proceeded to crumble down afterwards. Moving on to the last race, Hungary. Not a very exciting race, if we're honest, as normal. Qualifying, so it was Hamilton, Bottas and Kimi Räikkönen, and the results, there wasn't much change either there. You then had Hamilton, Vettel and Kimi Räikkönen. But in this race, we're going to be focusing on Fernando Alonso, who finally had some good news on his 37th birthday. So McLaren made the same strategy as Vettel work beautifully, resulting in Alonso and his teammate Stoffel van Dorn going ahead of Renault's Carlos Sainz, Haas's Romain Grosjean, Toro Rosso's Brendan Hartley, and Renault's Nico Hülkenberg to take 8th place. So rounding off this episode, in your opinion, where does Fernando Alonso rank in terms of F1 drivers full stop and in the modern era in general? Is he one of the best?
In short, yes.
Just leave it there.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Angus.
Yeah, nice and succinct. Yeah. Honestly, some of the qualities he's shown, I think for me, there's a trend amongst the very best in Formula One, and that is the ability to. You get some drivers who drop off, like sort of maybe early 30s or some point at that point in their career. But drivers like Alonso is one who's shown that trait. Michael Schumacher when he was driving, at least before he came back. Hamilton at the moment, being in their mid to late 30s and still being absolutely on top of their game. Alonso's 37 years old, and whilst he's had a car which has been rubbish for at least 4 years now, he's still proven he can absolutely wring the neck of it, get the absolute best out of it. For example, in this race, finishing 8th in a car, he finished above cars, for example. He finished above a Renault, above a Haas, above 2 Force Indias, which arguably across the season were faster than him. If you look at the trend of the season as well, so in this race, admittedly in a wet qualifying, he qualified 11th, whilst his teammate Stoffel van Dorn came all the way down as 16th. And across the season, Van Dorn is seen as a driver who, when he came in, had one of the best lower formula records ever. He came in with a very high reputation, and Alonso this season, the 21 races there were, Alonso out-qualified him in all 21. And being able to do this against one of the more talented drivers on the grid, quite remarkable in my opinion. Alonso throughout his career, he's had great teammates, such as he's absolutely destroyed Kimi Räikkönen when they were teammates. Felipe Massa went from championship contender to confirmed number 2 driver under him. Got to say, to be honest, Lewis Hamilton's the only teammate who's really given Alonso that much trouble. Even Jenson Button, when they were at McLaren together, Alonso definitely had the beating of him. And drivers in Button, Raikkonen, world champions, considered some of the best of this generation, sort of this 2000s generation. And Alonso just absolutely had the beating of them. And you got to say, other than maybe Hamilton and on some occasions Vettel, there aren't any other drivers who could consistently beat the best in the same car. The fact that Alonso's going to end his career with 2 world championships, I think, is an absolute travesty. He could have easily won 5 or 6. He's won 2 championships. He's been in the hunt at the final race a further 3 times. On 2 occasions with Ferrari, when the car again was absolutely rubbish. 2012 comes to mind, where the Ferrari was probably the 4th fastest car. Red Bull was the fastest, but then you had McLaren was faster. Lotus on a lot of occasions was faster. Even sometimes the Mercedes. And Alonso still dragged that car to 2nd place of the championship, led the championship for half the season, heartbreakingly missed out by 3 points. I think it's just his ability to wring the neck of the car, get absolute maximum out of it. and the fact he's ended his career with 2 World Championships, like I said, it doesn't reflect his overall talent. In terms of overall, I'd say out of this generation, it's a couple of years back I would have rated him above Hamilton, but I think Hamilton is going up in my estimates. He's definitely on his way to being one of the very best. But I think personally, I know we've only been on this planet about 20 years and only been able to look at a certain section of Formula 1 history, but from what I've seen and read and looked at over the past, Alonso for me is in my top 5 of all time. Honestly, I think he's that good. He just always gets the most out of the car. He's ruthless. I don't think he might have a weakness in terms of qualifying, because for example against Hamilton in Hamilton's debut season, Hamilton had that sort of, even at that age, had that sort of slight edge in raw speed, and that's probably what for me puts Hamilton above Alonso in the ranking of all time. But I still think Alonso, other than that, for me just has no weaknesses, and for me definitely top 5 of all time.
Ooh, top 5 of all time. It's definitely an all-time great. Whether or not you can put him up there with Jackie Stewart and the likes of Jim Clark and people like that, I'm not sure. But it's different. It's a completely different type of racing, though. Really, I mean, let's face it. Alonso's never actually had to, put his life in complete danger. When you go back really to days like Jackie Stewart, those sort of racing, if you went off the track you end up in the fireball or in many different pieces. It's just different type of racing. I mean, you gotta as you said, Alonso is definitely one of the greats of the sort of newer generation, and he is really one of those drivers that got screwed by the system rather than themselves. And his mistakes, he left Ferrari to go to McLaren rather. And McLaren was rubbish, leaving the rubbish Ferrari, who then got better. And it's one of those. Every decision he's made has sort of backfired a little bit. And you're absolutely right, to be able to get any sort of performance out of some of those McLaren cars is an absolute achievement in itself. They're just so bad. They're really, really bad. And actually, and everyone's like, it must be Honda's fault. It was Honda engines. Yeah, Honda engines were pretty bad. When I was there in 2016, they were still running them, and I heard them, and they sounded like tractors. They came. You could tell when a Mercedes would come past, and really smooth, very smooth, especially when they're braking. Because when you hear the exhaust note, you can hear what it actually sounds like. Very loud, very smooth, and you'd hear the McLaren coming. It was just like a rumbling of this sort of, it sounded like a car on 3 cylinders. It did not sound good, and it'd go into the corners and. It was awful. It was an abysmally bad sounding car, and it did not perform. And Alonso has had to get the sort of McLaren performance from it, and he's done well with that. And the McLaren chassis isn't all it's cracked up to be either. Look at with the Renault engine, it's not been brilliant. But Alonso has sort of kept it, sort of running, and he's got on the radio and said, "This is annoying, this is rubbish, I hate it." And maybe that's kicked them into gear a little bit. But there is a reason why he still causes problems for other drivers. Whenever another driver is trying to overtake Alonso, they struggle. Him and Raikkonen. They're fighting all the time, to try and get past, and Alonso makes everyone else's life very, very difficult. And that's the sort of thing I was saying about Bottas. Bottas doesn't do that. He's got a car that's way quicker, but he doesn't get it there. He doesn't put it in the right spots. He doesn't fight with them. Whereas Alonso, with a much slower car, holds up drivers for a long time. He sticks to his guns. I've got this spot. You don't. Get past me if you can. And that's the sort of spirit that makes Alonso brilliant. It's that, he's the Spanish bull. He's a fantastic driver. He will be remembered. It's a shame, as you say, he lost that championship. That was the one with Hamilton, wasn't it? When the very last minute Hamilton overtook the car. And again, there's just little things. It's so frustrating to watch, but that's what makes Alonso brilliant. It's coming back from that fighting spirit and going, do you know what, now I'm going to go to different racing. I'm not giving up. I'm going to try for the different titles. And I reckon he'll do brilliantly in a position where he isn't necessarily, where he's just fresh and new. He's not an old face there, and he's going to do his best. And I really, good luck to him. And I think he is one of the top 5 new generations. I put him above Lewis Hamilton because Lewis Hamilton has yet to be put in a crap car.
Yes, well, that's true. He's always had a
wait
gift
till
wrap.
Lewis Hamilton gets put into a car that underperforms, and then we'll work out whether he's as good. Because, as I say, Alonso's got to where he is with all the problems with different teams he's gone through as well.
I mean, the only time you could say that Hamilton was in a poor car was, I believe, 2009, when Brawn were dominating, and ultimately he did fail. So, you know, that is a very good comparison there. And it's just so disheartening as a fan seeing someone like Fernando Alonso, you know, someone who's wrestled for the title and constantly being on the podium, going to somewhere like McLaren, and he and Jenson Button just fighting against Sauber week in, week out. I mean, it's, you know, it is gut wrenching, but that is that. So thank you very much for listening to F1 in Review, episode 3. Thank you very much to Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher for their insightful and interesting opinions on various different things. Tune in to episode 4, where we'll be talking about Belgium, Italy, Russia and Japan. But that is that for this episode. My name's been Tom Claiborne, and thank you very much for listening.
Nice.
Thank you, mate.